we're going to work with the fondant that I made yesterday. Now, as I said, between 12 and 24 hours is perfect for that to sit. This has had about 18 hours or so. You can sit it for longer than 24 hours, that's no problem, but you want at least 12 hours so that it's really nice and firm. So when we unwrap that, it's a lot firmer than the fondant that we've just wrapped out. That's still really quite soft, and you'd sort of feel that and you'd think, oh, that's far too soft to work with. That's why we give it the overnight rest. So as I knead that, you can see how much elbow grease I'm having to put into that one just to soften it back up again. You'd want to knead this for about 2 minutes before you were to cover, say, a larger cake, or before you want to try and roll it out. Because we're only going to be colouring just a little bit of it today, just so that I can show you the principles behind it, I'm just going to tear off a little bit and save myself a little bit of kneading, and we'll wrap the rest back up. So we're just kneading that small portion that we're going to be colouring today. Now, I should also mention this recipe is going to yield you about 2 pounds or about 1 kilogram of finished fondant. So depending on how much fondant you think you're going to need, you might want to double the recipe. You can also halve the recipe. I always make at least one batch because I know that it's going to keep for a month or two, and I'm happy that I'm going to use it sort of as I go on cake decorating throughout the month. If you find that your fondant is sticking it all to your bench, a little bit of that leftover icing sugar or a little bit of cornstarch or corn flour in a shaker is always a fabulous tool to have when you're working with fondant. Sprinkle it down on the bench and it's just going to stop that stick on the bench. Now, when it comes to colouring your fondant, you've got a couple of different options here. You can colour that fondant right back at the beginning when we were melting the marshmallows. So your marshmallow and your water mix, once those marshmallows come out of the microwave and they're all nice and melted, you're giving them that final stir, you can add your drops of colour then. Your colour is going to fade a little bit once you start adding in your icing sugar, but it's a slightly easier and less messy way to colour your fondant. For me, I like to colour it after it's done. I find it personally a little bit easier, but I also find that I want to not colour the whole batch at once. So maybe I want to colour a quarter of this red and a quarter of it blue and a quarter of it green or whatever. So now that I'm happy I've kneaded that fondant so that it's really, really nice and soft again, I'm going to take some of my colours. When you're colouring fondant, I recommend not using liquid colours, and that's only because it adds more moisture to your fondant and it changes the consistency of it. So you can either use powder, gel or paste colours, and I've got a few different examples here of colours that I like to work with. So some brands that are really, really widely available when it comes to gel and colour pastes, Wilton is probably the most well known. So you can pick up these little pots, you can pick them up in bigger sizes, in different sorts of colours, so many different colours, and they're pretty widely available in most countries. I love AmeriColor colours. I find them really vibrant, and I think you need a little bit less of them to give you a little bit of a more stunning colour effect. You've also got just your regular, I think this is a Betty Crocker, just store-bought colours, but once again, they're not liquid. These are still gel colours. And then you've got colour powders. Now, I really do like colour powders because they're great for decorating with chocolates. You can colour chocolate with colour powders, but they're really quite hard to find. So I recommend the Wilton gels just as being a really easy to find alternative. Any of those is going to work for you when you're colouring fondant. To colour a little bit today, and we might go with some buttercup yellow, I take the top off my little pot and I just rip off a little bit of that fondant, particularly with these little pot colours. If I was using, say, the AmeriColor, I would just put a couple of drops onto the fondant, but for these ones, I almost make like a little fondant spoon. So you've got your little bit of fondant that we've torn off, dip it into that colour, rest it on top, and sandwich it up. This is the cleanest way. Whenever you're colouring fondant, you're going to get a little bit messy, but this is one of the cleanest ways that I've found to avoid getting too much colour on my hands. So I'm just going to knead that just between my thumbs and my fingers. And you can knead it on the bench, but if you're going to do that, make sure that you put down just something protective so that the colours don't seep into your bench, especially if you've got white benches. So I'm really just sort of pulling that through, folding it over. So we sort of pull the fondant, fold it, pull the fondant and fold it. And once I'm happy that the main colour has started to disperse through, I'm going to grab it in my hands and just continue kneading. You can see there, it's pretty messy work. When my colour gets to this stage, I know that there's no more of that raw colour that's going to come off. So you can see there it's sort of like a marbled effect, but I've lost any of the dark specks of colour. So I'm happy now to keep working it on my bench. It's always a little bit easier to work it on the bench than it is to work it between your hands. Just like you can put corn flour or icing sugar on the bench, you can also put it on your hands if you find they're getting a bit warm or a bit sticky. When it comes to storage of your fondant, this particular recipe I recommend lasts you about a month to 2 months. So a lot of store-bought fondants come with a 12-month expiry date. It's very generous. Whenever I store it, especially if I know I'm going to be storing it long term, a double wrap of plastic wrap and then in a Ziploc bag, so it's got an extra coat of protection. So there's our finished fondant. As you can see, it takes colour just as beautifully as any store-bought fondant. I hope you guys have loved this recipe. It was requested by you and made for you. If there's anything else that you want to see on My Cupcake Addiction, make sure you let me know in the comments box below. I do read them all and I do try my best to make what you guys want to see. As always, thanks very much for tuning in to My Cupcake Addiction.